Hi class, welcome to Module 5. In this module, you'll be going over two concepts, loops and array lists. What's going to be expected for Module 5 is to 1. Complete the zyBooks activities, as always. Complete Stepping Stone Lab 4, in which you'll be able to apply what you'll learn about loops. And then complete Milestone 1, which will be one of 2 milestones for the final project, in which you'll sort of convert Stepping Stone Lab 2 into the actual ingredient class that's going to be used for the final project. Okay, so for zyBooks, you'll be going through chapter 7 on loops. You'll be learning about while loops, do while loops, for loops, how to implement nested loops, one loop inside the other, sort of like nested if statements. You'll go through incremental programming, how to use break and continue statements, etc. So these are different topics that we'll be going over. They're all very important, so make sure that you go through each of these sections carefully, do the practice exercises and the challenge exercises. And I also suggest that you go through the optional sections as well, 7.10 and 7.12, as this will give you extra practice that will help you in the long run. So in chapter 8, you'll be reading sections 8.1 to 8.5 and doing the exercises for those as well. In this chapter, you'll be learning about array lists. So arrays and array lists. So arrays are essentially a data type. Array list is a data type in Java that allows you to store multiple values. So currently you've been storing a single value, single integers, single strings, single decimal values. So arrays will allow you to store multiple values of a single data type. Okay, so you'll be learning about array lists as well, and how to add items to array lists, retrieve items from an array list, and print items in array lists. So you can imagine that array lists are going to be very important later on for the final project when you want to store multiple ingredients for a single recipe, right? Each recipe is going to have one or more ingredients. So you're going to have to store all of these ingredients inside of an array list. So this is just one example of how you can use an array list. These array lists will also be important for storing multiple recipes inside of a recipe box, right? So you want to store multiple recipes, you're going to have to use an array list, which allows you to store multiple values of a single data type, whether it's an object that you created or a built-in data type that exists within Java, such as an integer or a string or a double or float, etc. Now, loops are also going to be important for the final project. You can imagine using a loop to store multiple ingredients, to ask the user to enter multiple ingredients, right? You're going to want to continuously ask the user within a loop, do you want to enter another ingredient? Yes or no? If the user says yes, then you read in another ingredient from the user. If the user says no, they're done entering ingredients, then you exit the loop. But that's something you can do continuously over and over. So loops basically allow you to do something repetitively with less amount of code, right? You don't want to continuously just copy and pasting the same code, doing it over and over. And eventually there's going to be a limit to the number of times the user is going to be able to enter in something, or the number of times you're going to be able to do something repetitively if you do not use a loop. But if you use a loop, then you can do things repetitively and just continuously do those based on a given condition. And you'll learn about this within chapter 7. So let's quickly just summarize what's expected for Module 5. You'll be learning about loops and array lists. You'll be given Stepping Stone Lab 3 solutions. So this is important to go through. Make sure you understand. If there's any questions, please reach out, because understanding the concepts in Stepping Stone Lab 3 are important for being able to do well on future assignments. So if you have any questions about Stepping Stone Lab 3 and the solutions, please reach out as soon as possible. You'll be going through the zyBooks, so chapter 7 and 8 on loops and array list. You'll be working on Stepping Stone Lab 4, in which you'll be implementing a simple do-while loop. You'll be applying what you learned about loops in this assignment. So the guidelines are here, and remember the Stepping Stone Lab 2 through the Stepping Stone Labs 2 through 6 rubric. This is important to always follow, keep close by. You want to make sure you address all the critical elements in this rubric. so that you receive full credit. This includes the written code reflection. So the written code reflection is the Word document or text file that you should be submitting along with your .java files. And in this reflection, you should talk about the purpose of the code, how you went about solving the problem or the task that was asked, and then also the challenges you faced and how you overcame those challenges. So this should be submitted with every single Stepping Stone Lab assignment. And then you'll be working with the milestone 1, which is going to be implementing the ingredient class. So you'll be learning what you've learned in Stepping Stone Labs 2 and 3 and applying this to this ingredient class. So this is be one of 2 milestones working toward the final project. So implementing this is very important. You do not need to submit a written code reflection for milestone 1. So just you'll be submitting the ingredient class, the ingredient.java file. So let's look at the actual Stepping Stone Lab 4 guidelines. So in this Stepping Stone Lab, you'll be implementing a loop that will continuously ask the user if they want to enter another ingredient until the user says no, and then it's going to exit the loop, and then it's going to print out all of the ingredients that the user entered. Okay, so the idea here is you're going to be entering all the ingredients for a single recipe, and this is going to be important for later on in the final project. So basically what you're going to do, you're going to first create an array list of strings, right? So the string is the data type. An array list is going to be able to store multiple strings. And this is going to be the list of the ingredient name. So each string is going to be a different ingredient name. And you're going to have a do-while loop where you're going to basically ask the user if they want to enter another ingredient. The user is going to say yes or no. If the user says yes, then you read in the ingredient name and you store that ingredient inside of the array list. And you can do this again repetitively. Does the user want to enter another ingredient? If the user says yes, then it asks the user to enter the ingredient name and stores the next ingredient in the array list. And it's going to continuously do this until the user says no, they don't want to enter another ingredient, and then it's going to break out of the loop. And at this point, you're going to use a for loop to print out all of the ingredients inside of the ingredient list, inside of the array list. Okay, so you're going to iterate through each item, each ingredient in the array list and print that out using a for loop. And you're going to need to use branch control structure, so if statements, in order to check to see if the user said yes, they want to enter another ingredient, or no, and execute the appropriate code based on the user's response within the loop. Okay, so you're going to use a do-while loop, and inside of this do-while loop, you're going to have branching control structure to execute what's expected. Let's quickly look at what's expected for milestone 1. So in milestone 1, you'll be creating the ingredient class. So it's a big step toward completing the final project, right? So for the ingredient class, you're basically going to use the ideas that you learned in Stepping Stone Labs 2 and 3, as well as some other concepts. But the idea here is that now you're going to be using these variables: name, amount, unit of measure, and calories, right? So this is a bit different than Stepping Stone Lab 2. These variables are more generic, right? They're not specific to a cup, right, as the unit of measure. Now you can enter a generic unit of measure, generic amount, right, and calories. So these are the variables that you're going to be using. These are going to be the instance variables of the class. You need to assign these appropriately and make sure that you assign them as private instance variables, right? So this is going to you're going to take advantage of the idea of encapsulation. So that's one aspect of this assignment. So you're going to create the ingredient class. You're going to create these instance variables, these private instance variables. You want to make sure you assign the correct data types to each of these variables, just like you did in Stepping Stone Lab 2. So whether it's numerical or string data type, you just want to make sure you assign each of these data types, each of these variables, the correct data types. And then you're going to make sure that you use inline comments for each of the variables explaining the purpose of each of these variables and why you selected the data type that you did. And this will just be a few words for each of the different variables. Okay, so one key thing here is that you're going to be, these instance variables are going to be private. That being said, that you're going to need getter and setter methods, otherwise known as accessor and mutator methods. So this is an idea that was talked about briefly in chapter 3. So I highly recommend that you review chapter 3 on getter, on accessor and mutator methods. So you'll need to use this because these instance variables are private. The only way to access these variables when you're actually using an ingredient object will be through the accessor and mutator methods. So each of the variables are going to need an accessor and mutator method, otherwise known as a getter and setter method. So additionally, within the main method of this ingredient class, you're going to need to do something similar to what you did in Stepping Stone Lab 3. You're going to need to validate each of the different variables that the user enters. So each of the values that the user enters. So for each of these variables, the user is going to enter an input, and you're going to store that value in this variable. But you want to make sure you validate the user input for each of the variables. Okay, so you can do this in a similar way that you did in Stepping Stone Lab 3 by maybe giving the user 2 attempts for each of the attributes, or you can even take advantage of what you're learning in this module on loops and possibly continuously ask the user repetitively to enter in a value for a single variable until it's valid. So you're going to continuously, repetitively ask the user, do you want to enter please enter the unit of measure, and you continuously ask the user this until they enter a valid unit of measure, right? A valid value. So that is another option. However, that's not required, but the idea here is you just need to validate the user's input for each variable, each value that the user enters. Okay, and you want to make sure again that you always comment your code, so use inline comments where necessary. Okay, so that's what's expected for this ingredient class. I highly recommend that you look through the rubric, look through each of the critical elements, and make sure you pay attention to the proficient column, as this is what's going to be used to grade your assignment. Okay, so if you have any questions about any of this, please reach out as soon as possible, and I'd be happy to help.